My very special guest has had a diverse 25 plus year career in human capital management, specializing in employee engagement, leadership development, and culture change initiatives in the workplace. His journey has ranged from working for the corporate industry leader to building his own entrepreneurial startup from the ground up. He supports innovative employee, patient, caregiver, human experience leaders, nurse clinician entrepreneurs, and hospital administration. He also hosts the Moments of Experience podcast. He is Geoffrey Smith. Welcome to the show, Geoffrey.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
It's my pleasure. I know we've had just a brief conversation before. I was just blown away by your background, and I couldn't wait to have you on the show talking all about employee engagement and specifically in the context of healthcare. I think you've got lessons that really apply to all
Abs-
businesses, of course, but I'm just looking forward to digging into that with you
Yeah,
today.
absolutely. No, all in, I have 25 years in employee engagement across all industries, but the last 10 has been specifically dedicated to healthcare.
I like that deep dive. But what blew me away, obviously, the first time we talked, is that you have such this powerful personal story that really talks about the connection, I would say, between employee engagement, but specifically in that healthcare setting. I just wonder if you might share that with our audience.
Yeah, so um, it wasn't until my personal and professional lives collided that I even think I understood the importance of my own work. As I said, the last 10 years has been healthcare employee engagement, but it wasn't until my wife's battle with cancer that I saw it through the patient's eyes, that everything really changed for me and changed kind of the landscape of my career and my purpose in life. And I watched firsthand her hang on every word and instruction of the nurse that made her laugh and coincidentally tune out the clinician that had his head buried in his computer and wouldn't make eye contact. I witnessed firsthand the dynamic teams, which are really exclusive to healthcare, that work together, although they don't tree up to a traditional org chart. You know, a social worker working with environmental services, working with the nurse, the food service, all working together to create, in some cases, an amazing care experience, and sometimes not so amazing. And it all came together for me one day where I was actually doing an all-day workshop at a 25,000 plus academic health system near me around leadership development and employee engagement and how employee engagement truly impacts patient outcomes in healthcare. And we're bringing in different parts of the organization throughout the day, OD and LD for 90 minutes, C-level for 90 minutes, nurse leadership. And we got halfway through the workshop and broke for lunch. And coincidentally, my wife happened to be 800 yards away from the CHRO's boardroom in the cancer center being prepped for a bone marrow transplant. So I walked across the street, walked into a room. My wife's nurse had her arm around her. My wife was crying. So I ran over and I said, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Because Gloria didn't bring me my lunch today. Gloria sings to me when she brings me my lunch." And it was just this really powerful moment because here I am in front of the CEO of this healthcare system with whiteboards and PowerPoints talking about how employee engagement impacts patient outcomes. And a food service employee is impacting my wife's mood as she fights for her life. And it was just very powerful. We got into the next session, and one of the people from the healthcare organization was pushing back on some of our ideas and said, "I see how we could do some of this stuff with our nurses, but I'm not sure how we scale it across the organization." And I just raised my hand. And I said, "Hey, can I tell a story? It's like 45 minutes old." And the tenor of the meeting changed. It changed from bullet points and whiteboards and PowerPoints to true human connection and how every touch point at a large health system like that has the opportunity to create an extraordinary experience or a not so extraordinary experience. So that really started me on the path. I soon thereafter left my cushy corporate gig because I wasn't getting enough moments like that. And I truly wanted to make a bigger impact on those that both provide and receive care.
It's an amazing shift in perspective and prioritization and such a breakthrough. And so much of the work that we do in organizations, even outside of the people leaders, we think about the business in very technical terms and we pour over the numbers, and it's very sterile sometimes the way we look at it, as if we didn't have customers. Because how often when you work inside the four walls do you actually get to talk to a customer? Well, forward that over to healthcare, and all of a sudden, the same thing kind of tends to happen. You think about doctors think about procedures, but there's real patience behind it. And for you to have that experience and to make that connection, it must have really changed. It sounds like not just the trajectory of that conversation, that training event, but also sort of how you have approached it ever since.
Yeah, because what I found after that moment is I was only doing the engagement and the things like that that I truly believe impact patient outcomes. I was only doing that about 30% of my job. So that's what really opened my eyes to say, I want to do this 100% of the time because I just want to impact lives.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I think that every manager, regardless of whether you're in a healthcare setting or otherwise, trying to restore, I would say, the real world implications of what we do. Maybe build water towers. Great. Clean water. How's that showing up in the community? Whatever it is, you don't have to be too creative about it. Just to say, like, who are the real people that benefit from the work that we do every day? It really sort of gives us that, to a lesser degree, the perspective shift that you're talking about of saying there's real people who are affected positively or negatively by the way that we approach our work.
Absolutely.
I think that healthcare is interesting because I would suspect I've never worked directly in healthcare, but I think that in fields like education, law, law enforcement, perhaps, that the people in healthcare were probably drawn to the field in some way because of the mission about helping people heal, for lack of a better term. But interpersonal and this type of organizational work that we do often comes with friction, I like to call it sometimes, just different types of challenges. In your experience, Jeffrey, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen in the healthcare system, for example, when it comes to just doing the work?
Yeah, and that was one of the first things that struck me when I kind of jumped without a net and left the corporate world. The first thing I was greeted with in trying to figure out where my lane is to make this impact is just the issues. A lot of negativity. Paul Dechant, who's a colleague of mine, wrote a book on clinician burnout. And he said,
Mm.
the healthcare system was never designed. It just evolved. And as a 24/7, 365 business, he said, it's hard to change the tires on a moving bus. So broken systems is one thing that leads to burnout, cynicism, disconnect from that original purpose. Like you said, you get into it with a very purposeful outlook, but then the systems get you and the administrative hassle. The doctors and nurses are dealing with stuff that is not giving them enough time with their patients and not enough time for why they were purposeful and wanted to get into the healing arts. And then we have a staffing and retention problem. The next generation of the workforce is different. My mom was an RN. She worked at one hospital for 48 years. That's not the same as, the next generation. We're losing 50% of our nurses within 2 years of graduation of nursing school, where they're leaving the bedside. So staffing is difficult. Nurses are burned out. Nurses are overworked. So it's all these things, the administrative hassle, the broken systems, the staffing, that is disconnecting our caregivers from their original purpose.
It's almost like I often talk about there's externalities and internalities to the organization. And those externalities of, when we talk about cost-based accounting and these types of the systems, and you have to negotiate with the insurance provider to get your rates, and then you have to have operating control costs. And those are all types of externalities. The internalities are, how do we treat one another? The team dynamic you talked about earlier. And I love the example you shared where a food service worker was saying that my own personal demonstration of leadership is to sing when I deliver food because it seems to make my patients happy.
Right.
It's like, it doesn't take earth shattering stuff, but it is, I think it would be not appropriate to pretend that there isn't friction in the system that we do have to acknowledge and have to overcome. And it's very true in certain industries, but it sounds like healthcare's really got it a lot.
And it's amazing how that there's so much science and evidence-based research that just backs up being human, that backs up the power of compassion, the power of empathy, the power of being authentically present with your patients, no matter who you are.
I talk a lot about rehumanizing the work because in this increasingly mechanized way that we do work today, it can be fairly dehumanizing. And it's sort of ironic that you would have to think about how to do that in healthcare, which could there be a more human industry, really? You're talking about people that are not at their best in terms of the quote unquote customers, people needing to heal. And it's such a profoundly personal thing. But at the same time, big systems, they have these mechanics to them where that even healthcare workers are susceptible to it.
Well, it's the three things I just talked about and I could give you a list of more that separate those people from being engaged. And that's why I always just like to say employee engagement in some industries could be considered a buzzword, but in healthcare, it's a necessity for optimal patient outcomes. And that's where when my personal and professional lives collided, finally understood the importance of what I was doing.
Yeah. Wow. 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 So let's say that I run a healthcare system. It sounds like, as an example, you mentioned OD and
Yep.
LD, like the organizational design teams and learning and development teams. And we want to make some transformation here. We want to do better. We want to try to introduce some techniques, some tools, whatever it might be. How would you recommend that we approach something, whether it's introducing leadership, mentorship, something like this, some of the people practice? What are some things that we want to make sure we get right when following those types of good intentions and impacting the organization?
The first thing I want to find out is how authentic are they in saying they want to transform? Um,
Fair point.
because they have to be open to thinking radically different. And healthcare is very hard at doing it, trying something that isn't the way they've always done it. I always like to say healthcare is at the forefront of clinical innovation, yet lags 30 years behind the private sector and people strategy. And
Wow.
I'll answer your question with an example of employee engagement. Um, for example, there are many hospitals that still view employee engagement as a once a year event or a survey versus a living, breathing organism that changes shift to shift, patient to patient, or most importantly, team leader to team leader. So when I come in, I have to tell them that they really have to be open to looking at things a different way. I evangelize and teach a very different way to measure, act on, and execute engagement in healthcare systems because I know how important it is to not just those employees, but the patients that they're serving. And what I
Mm.
teach is a bottom-up approach because currently what healthcare organizations do, they do their once a year survey. They have all of this data that's top down. They have organizational metrics that they just sit there and stare at it and have nothing to take action on. So what I teach is a bottom-up approach where we measure engagement team by team and not the teams that are on their org chart, the teams I talked about, those dynamic teams, where the work is happening, where the engagement is occurring, the people that are working together to provide that extraordinary care experience. And when we measure them in bite-sized pockets, we actually have something actionable. Because when we find the teams that are 5 out of 5, all in engaged, okay, guess what we also found? We found the best team leaders. And when we find the best team leaders, we have something we can do with it now. We have something we can take action on. First off, we look at those leaders and we mirror them. And second of all, we answer one question and one question only. How do we make more teams like our best teams?
Hmm. Replicate that success. Yeah. It's amazing. When I think about, I had shoulder surgery recently, and I have no idea who my surgical team reports to. You had nurses in there, you had an
Yep.
anesthesiologist, you've got the surgeon, you got all these different. I have no idea. But the point I'm making is simply they've probably report to different team
Yes.
leaders, right? Who have different levels of just natural being good at creating engagement. And here I am watching this dynamic play out, and it absolutely, I can see exactly what you're saying about how the level of engagement, the type of patient care that they're giving, these are intrinsically linked. You can't separate them. And I think it's wild.
Yeah, and I got to see it, and that's where I got to do my own non-scientific study where I sat there and I watched this dynamic. Um,
Mm.
and there were times where I'd go up to, although they don't report technically to the same person, there is a team leader on a floor. There is a team leader. There is someone in charge. And I would go up to them when I was on that floor that we just received extraordinary care. And I just said, hey, one time I walked up and I said, what is your secret? Because the experience we get on this floor is different than any other. And she looked at me, she said, Jeff, I just teach everyone to lead with compassion. And it's
Wow.
that simple. And everyone buys in and everyone feels like they have their back. Every team member feels like they have that, each other have each other's back, and it just works. And but when you approach it from that perspective in bite-sized things that we can actually take action on, we can scale that across a 25,000, a 30,000, 100,000 employee health system. It takes time though.
Well, I love what you said in that quote as well, because I teach these people, right, compassion. And I think that again, without having been in healthcare, I would presume that a lot of times the people who are in charge probably have the highest specializations. So your more specialized docs and nurses tend to, be in charge in many cases, or at least based on tenure as well. But that doesn't mean that they necessarily got trained in the importance of things like employee engagement or how to be compassionate. So I think that's the mistake we make, is that they had to work so hard just to get the medical boxes checked and make sure that they were expert. But then we put them in this organizational environment without the training, without the tools, without the mindset, and be like, go crash into each other like bumper cars and do it at cost faster than ever and deliver great patient experience. They're like, what are you talking about? How do you do
And by
that?
the way, many of the guests on my podcast come to me from that. My first guest was one of the world's leading educators on putting compassion into practice. She teaches compassion at healthcare systems. I had another a guest that owns a micro learning company. He's a former physician that teaches bedside manner, that teaches in bite-sized increments to these healthcare. So there are people teaching this stuff. And because there is that need for a reconnection of purpose, we might not have needed that training when we were fresh out of college and fresh out of medical school. But over time, those systems, the administrative hassle, the staffing, all of that starts eating on us, where we do need a refresher.
Well, and that absolutely happens outside of
Yeah,
healthcare, which is why I'm glad we're generalizing this conversation, because when you think about it, if you have a compassionate caregiver, but they don't know the medical parts of their job, that's not going to turn out too
right.
well. It's not an either or. It's a yes and, right?
Yeah,
But when you look at what's happening in the traditional jobs in the world of work, there's still this tremendous need for compassion because the work has gotten more technical, more stressful. We've never seen the levels of burnout, isolation, the types of frustration about return to office. Like there's a tremendous equivalency, I would say, between the stress that the average worker feels outside of healthcare and a lot of what has taken place inside of healthcare. So I feel like this counsel, this wise counsel of saying, I teach my people to lead with compassion. I don't care if you're in manufacturing, if you're in consulting,
absolutely.
contracting, construction, doesn't matter. Like that's still damn good advice, in my opinion,
Yeah,
Geoffrey.
and absolutely. And I had a guest on recently. She's a expert on clinician burnout, and she said there's two sides to care as a doctor. There's the science. She said, but the most important part is the art. The art is being human. The science we learn in school, but the art is just being human, being compassionate, being empathetic. And a lot of times, doctors, the healthcare system kind of treats the system like they treat their patients. They just kind of prescribe pills. They just put Band-Aids on things. I mentioned the system
Mm.
wasn't designed. They're just trying to figure it out as they go on. But it's amazing. A lot of doctors go the same way as the system goes. Okay, someone comes in with a crick neck into the emergency room. Well, let me just prescribe a muscle relaxer. Well, this doctor I was talking to said, no, no, no. I'm going to do the art of this, and I'm going to find out what's going on in their life. And it turns out it was
Mm.
stress related. And they just sat there and
Yeah.
talked, and it went away. So there's so much of the human side that's outside of the science.
And I think that we don't get to see this, but I know that in addition to the electronic medical records, that doctors have expectations about, oh, you're going in to see a knee. Okay, here's how many minutes you have to
Yes.
spend with that person based on all of our, actuarials and all of our numbers. And I want to use the right terms, but I know that they're looking at such large data sets of numbers. And the same thing is happening when for example, you see inside of some warehousing situations where there's so much AI and so much robotics, and they're trying to do the same thing in many cases with humans in those industries too. It's like we're trying to get all the variables
Yep.
out, get the efficiency up, but it might come at the expense of being human
Absolutely.
and showing that compassion. Then all of a sudden, when your burnout rises, your engagement drops, like it's going to be devastating. So we think we're doing the right thing by trying to remove some of the art from the business, but be careful, right? Because there could be this counteracting
And
effect.
there are some physicians that are very much pushing back on these systems
Yeah.
and these metrics and the timer and the things like that.
Yeah.
But it's hard because the system is telling them, here are the
Yeah.
numbers you need to meet. And you have a lot of great doctors leaving major systems and
Mm.
just going out on their own because they're like, no, I'm not going to spend 15
Yeah.
minutes with my patient. I'm going to spend 30 minutes with my patient.
Right. I'll make it work.
So
Yeah. And it's a tough position to be in, obviously, too. So Not an easy fix, obviously, but I do think that being able to take a more holistic view of it, it will always serve us well. And for you taking that personal view of what you experienced and making those critical connections, I think makes you a very powerful force in terms of helping them understand and see and put together those programs. But I want to shift gears, Jeffrey, if I can. You mentioned, for example, that you host podcast. And I think that I mentioned in the top, you're the host of this Moments of Experience podcast. Can you tell me about the show and what listeners can expect, when you put things over your airwaves like
Yeah, I
that?
mentioned in the middle at the beginning, like when I first got out of my corporate gig and trying to figure out where my place is in healthcare, I got a lot of negativity, a lot of all of the problems, and I didn't find a lot of outlets for telling the positive stories of the true innovators in employee experience, patient experience, caregiver experience, and just plain human experience, like we've been talking about. So what I do is I bring on some of the world's leaders in those four categories: employee, patient, caregiver, and human experience. And what we do is we explore the moments um, that shaped them, that moved them, that inspired them to pursue their purpose in life. And a lot of the stories are very difficult. I recently had on the CEO of a major healthcare system in downtown New York City, that he was the CEO on the front lines during COVID. And he tells chilling stories about, what happened there, but also the positive, what came of it, and how he learned to be a leader in that capacity. I bring on, I just mentioned before, the educators on compassion. I brought on a, a healer that uses dogs to help folks deal with mental health issues and things like that. So it's just purposeful people that are innovating healthcare in positive ways, and healthcare and beyond, by the way. It's not all healthcare, but it does use healthcare as a backdrop in a lot of the episodes. But it's just really, when did we connect to purpose? Or to our point that we were talking earlier, when did we reconnect to purpose after having the system take it out of us?
Yeah, I like using healthcare because it's something we can all relate to. We've all had varying levels of illness before. We've seen sort of everything from small providers to large healthcare systems. So it's kind of something we can relate to and extrapolate those lessons to other industries, wherever it is we might work, if we're not in healthcare, for example. So it sounds like you've got a really great set of insights from your guests that pertain to healthcare, yes, but even beyond, which I really love. And so we've been talking about some pretty serious topics here, but on my show, I also like to have a little bit of fun too. So I thought we might have a fun trivia segment I like to call, Are We Smarter Than AI? And you mentioned that you had a guest on who had dogs talking about how to help people heal. And in fact, your show, Moments of Experience, I know is named after Mo, who was your beagle,
Yes,
right?
it is.
It's an amazing story.
Yeah, my very first episode, I tell the origin story of Mo and why the show is named after him. He is, I said, he is now a 14 and a half-year-old beagle going strong. Our goal is to have him be the oldest beagle in history. And during a time of tragic loss and life-threatening family illness at the exact same time, Mo showed us love, compassion, selflessness, that at a time where me and my wife didn't even have any hope ourselves, he was strong enough to give us hope. And that's why the show's named after him. And I tell the story in my very first episode.
It's beautiful. And so in Mo's honor, we're going to have a trivia question for us related to beagles.
Okay. Okay.
And now I don't know anything about beagles, Jeffrey. I know nothing about them. So this might be, we're a team though. We're going up against AI here. This one says, beagles are known for their distinctive tricolored coat. What are the three colors typically found on a beagle's coat? Oh my gosh, it's gotta be white and brown, but what else is
Black.
it?
Black,
Is that
black,
right?
white,
White,
and brown.
brown? Okay, all right. Hey, check this out. Let's see if we got it right. I have a good feeling. That's absolutely correct. Ding, ding, ding. Beagles typically have a tricolored coat of white, brown, and black. So audience, if you were playing along at home, I hope you got that one right too. Jeffrey, that's amazing. But I'm gonna ask you a better question, which is, where can my audience go to learn more about you and about Moments of Experience?
Yeah. So it's www.momentsofexperience.com. The only change in that is because it's named after Mo, it's Mo-Ments of experience.com. So they can find me there. That's where all the episodes are. Tells my background. There's a photo gallery of my beautiful dog Mo, and all that good stuff. So absolutely.
Awesome. Well, listeners, I'm going to put that link in the show notes. You're one click away from getting over to Moments of Experience, learning more about Geoffrey. Geoffrey, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today, sharing your unique perspective. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.